I'm BERNINA Expert Amanda Murphy, and I'd like to show you tips and tricks for quilting my carousel quilt. It's part of my booklet, the Cotton Shot Collective. The Cotton Shot Collective features instructions for 5 different quilts, of which carousel is one. I made the original quilt with a navy background, but several color options are available. They all use one of my 4 free motion feather prints, accompanied by several shades of my Cotton Shot Basics line. When quilting on a domestic machine, I like to begin by basting around the entire quilt in the binding area, about 1/8 of an inch from its raw edge. I use fairly large stitches when basting. I then quilted along the seam lines that separate the borders from the body of the quilt. This prevents the borders from shifting with subsequent quilting. I further stabilized the quilt top by quilting in the ditch around all the large circles. This is a non-traditional quilt, so I had to use a non-traditional method of stabilizing the quilt top. First, I stitched around the center circle, and then I stitched the rays, finally, I stitched the horizontal rings, working from ring to ring along my previous stitching. Now, when I say stitch in the ditch, I really stitched along the ditch, a little more to the background side of the seam line. Next, it was time to quilt my medium circles. First, I quilted all the way around the outside. Then, starting a new thread, I quilted around the central circle. I did a few stitches to lock in my threads, and then I brought over a ruler of a similar size. This is one of my every circle rulers. It's not the exact size of that central circle, but that doesn't matter. It still helps me move around the design smoothly. I'm quilting here on the BERNINA Q16, and I have the number 96 foot on the machine. If you were on a domestic BERNINA, you would of course have a number 72 foot on. Notice how often I'm starting and stopping. That enables me to reposition the ruler and just quilt a little bit of the way each time as I work my way around. A common mistake of most beginner quilters is they don't start and stop enough. Instead, they try to hold the ruler in one position and quilt all the way around the circle, and that never works well because it's hard to keep control of the ruler from all different quilting directions. I just clipped those threads. I'll actually be going over those threads again. And here, I'm quilting a little bit to the outside of that folded circle. I'm using a neutral thread. You could also use monofilament, or you could go for gold and use a contrasting thread. I'm almost back where I started. And without breaking my thread, I'm going to go around the circle again using a larger curve. This is my 12-inch every curve ruler. So instead of just quilting in the ditch as would be traditionally done under Dresden, I decided to quilt curves that connect the points of the Dresden. So I actually made 2 passes with this design. So here I'm going over the big wedge and stitching from its inner point to its outer point using that 12-inch every curve ruler. Now I'm stitching back to the inner point. And now I'm getting to the narrower Dresden plates, and I'm going to stitch to the center of those 2 narrow plates. So the edge of my ruler is 1/4 inch away from that point I'm trying to hit. I'm adding another layer of texture to this design. My ruler slid a little there, but you can see I just repositioned it and kept going. and now I quilt back down to the base of the Dresden again. Now I continue doing this all the way around the circle. I'm removing my basting stitches as I go. The basting function is a wonderful feature of the Q series. So back out to the outer point, and you'll notice the excess quilt top is basically puddled around my working area. I only want to be having to move just a small area of the quilt sandwich. And I continue all the way around the circle to complete the first pass, the design. This is the last part here. And I go back down to the base of that Dresden. And now I want to do a second pass of the design. I just think it looks more interesting, and given the density of the quilting on other parts of the quilt top, I think I need a little more quilting here. If I don't put a little more quilting here, the quilt probably won't lay flat. It'll balloon out where the medium Dresdens are. So I moved over one blade, and now I'm basically doing an offset path. So I go up to that little corner of the Dresden, and what I want to do is aim back so I'm coming down to the base of the wide Dresden. You can just put a little mark there to help you eyeball it. I didn't bother measuring it. I don't think it shows if you're a little off. So I just put a little blue mark in to help me, and then I quilted back down to the base of the wide Dresden. Now you can see I used a light color of thread here, and it provides just enough contrast to make things interesting. Once again, I want my ruler 1/4 of an inch away from the point that I'm trying to hit. Now you'll notice in this film I already have the background done in this instance. I would not normally, I was waiting for the machine to arrive, and so I had to partially finish this. Normally I would quilt all the Dresdens first before doing anything in the background. Continue quilting curves around the circle until you complete the design. Next, I quilted the small circles, so I began by quilting all the way around the Dresden, then ending my thread quilting around its center, and then quilting arcs around the design. And this time I used the same every curve ruler, but I used its 8-inch side because I wanted a tighter curve. This is a smaller circle. So you can see I just quilted connecting the inner Dresden points to the outer points. I did not do a second pass on those circles because they're smaller and I didn't feel it was really needed. Let's talk about the next step in the process, quilting the shadow circles that echo the piecing designs in the background. You can see here I have the template, and I've already gone over all the lines on the template using an unthreaded needle in my sewing machine, and I turn the thread sensor off to do this. So there's little holes all along those lines. Now I go in with pouncing chalk, and I have a makeup brush, and I brush the template with chalk, and that is going to transfer my design to the fabric itself. I recommend only doing this with white chalk. I do not like the colored chalks. They are hard to get out. Before you move the paper off of your quilt, you will want to make sure that you peel it back just a bit so that you can peek underneath and make sure the design is well transferred. So there we have it, a transferred design. Instead of starting with tiny stitches like I normally would do to lock the threads, I started out with my normal stitch length of 10 stitches per inch. So you can see me bringing the bobbin thread up, and then I bring my foot down, then I bring my ruler over, And I begin to stitch at that 10 stitches per inch stitch length. I don't like to do tiny stitches when I'm using thick threads because I think you can see them. So instead, I keep my beginning and my end threads long, and I later go back and knot and bury them in the quilt sandwich. This is a method I'd also use for a juried quilt show, but I don't normally do juried shows, so I normally only use this method with thick threads because I'm too lazy to do it otherwise. Even if your ruler's shifted, make sure that you reposition it so that your points meet when you're closing that circle. Next, switch to a straight ruler and you can quilt the rays. You'll notice I chose to quilt that circle a little bigger than it was originally marked, and that's fine. You should feel free to make adaptations to your design. Remember, these marks are going to disappear. No one is going to know they're there. And I'm using my every angle ruler here. And the rest of my quilt top is puddled around me, or my quilt sandwich, I should say. I'm only moving one part of the quilt sandwich. So now, I quilted down to the circle and then back up again. That does mean there is a double line of quilting there, but I thought it was less noticeable if there were double lines on all the rays. So there's a single line on the outside of the quilted plate, and then there's a double line as it meets the center circle. And just take your time as you go around. Now, I'm going to speed up this video so you don't have to watch the whole thing, and you can just enjoy quilting really quickly. So I bring my bobbin thread to the top. This time I keep it long. And I do an overhand knot. I use my finger to hold that knot down as I tighten it, like you would a French knot. And then I use the chenille needle, which is a needle with a sharp point but a big eye. It makes it easy to thread all of these ends at once. And I take it and I run it through the quilt sandwich until that knot pops into the sandwich itself. Then I clip the threads, and that ends the thread beautifully. Even a thick thread, it's undetectable. Then you'll fill in the background with your favorite free motion fill. And here I'm doing swirls surrounded by feathers. So I just did a swirl, went in and out, and I'm doing feather plumes around it. You can really do whatever background fill you like. The point is it contrasts with the more structured work that you did on the Dresden plates themselves. So to give that feather more emphasis, I'm echoing around. And I'm using the edge of my foot to gauge the echo distance. It does not have to be perfect. For this step, you can really start in the center of the quilt and work it out. And when you come to a Dresden plate, simply quilt around it like the background design is behind the Dresden itself. And this is what it looks like when it's complete. I hope you've enjoyed learning how I quilted Carousel. Join me in my Facebook group, Quilting with Amanda Murphy, and on Instagram at Amanda Murphy Design. Happy quilting!